to have the second event of the Australia-Israel Scholar Seminars. You can look at the website for these seminars. The purpose of the sequence of events is to foster collaboration between Australian scholars and scholars in Israel in the variety of fields of technology and science, education, and of course the humanities. So the idea of the series is to have a sequence of short talks on a Tuesday and on a Thursday at 4 p.m. Australian Eastern Time, which is 9 p.m. Israeli time. Talks are broadcasted onto an Australian university room. In the case of today, we have the University of Queensland room. Future talks might have some more rooms. So feel free to look us up. I'd also just like, as is customary and respectful in Australia, to do acknowledgement of country, and we acknowledge the Jagara people and the Turrbal people. These are the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today. We pay respects to their elders, past and present, and we extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. For today, we have on very short notice, and it's actually an important public holiday for him. So thank you for making time. This is Sergei Talanker from Western Galilee College. And Sergei will speak about consequences in education, assessment, discipline, and punishment. There are not too many of us in the lecture hall just today, but let's please thank Sergei for his time and welcome him. Thank you, Sergei.
Thank you for having me. Well, in general, my lecture is about ethics in education. So I don't presume that you're all ethicists or ethicists who specialize in education. So I'll try to accommodate my lecture to anybody who ever studied in university or ever taught at any university. I will begin with a rhetorical question. Do consequences matter, ethically speaking? And it's a rhetorical question. I would like to say yes. Well, most scholars advocate for a balanced approach in solving moral dilemmas in teaching practice, which is the area that I'm studying. They say that all valid theories are to be considered, including consequentialist theories. But my previous research indicates that scholars tend to play different moral theories off each other while arguing for endless dialogue, resulting in moral dilemmas in teaching never getting resolved. Talk, no resolution. And now, in this presentation, I will argue that consequences are considered in such dilemmas in a manner that no contemporary consequentialist would find acceptable. Thus, distorting consequentialist considerations leads to inability to resolve even trivial cases. I will give you an example of such a case. For your convenience, consequentialism simply means that normative properties depend on consequences. In other words, something is bad if it leads to bad results. That simple. So what is my present argument? Well, I argue that consequences regarding both aggregate utility, the quantity of the outcome, and its distribution are integral to ethical decision-making in education, just like in any field. Consequentialism should not be represented by an outdated version of act utilitarianism, which is a theory that posits that the utility of acts ought to be considered regardless of the utility of rule breaking or rule following. We're looking, act utilitarianism looks at each act as if it is separated from the context. I say, well, nowadays we don't do that. A common motif in distorting consequentialism is considering only the consequences for an individual rule breaker and disregarding the utility of the community, And a common strawman argument that I find against consequentialism is this. It allows for the punishment of the innocent or the acquittal of the guilty for the sake of some greater good. Well, it doesn't. Nowadays, consequentialists we don't do that. So here is a case from Strike and Salty's The Ethics of Teaching. A very good book, by the way, but suffering from the same flaws that I will now point out. Let's take a look at the case of calculated plagiarism from an underprivileged student of color on a basketball scholarship. Deontological or duty-based considerations point into the direction of well-deserved punishment. You plagiarize a paper, you get an F. That is the right thing to do. The NEA Code of Ethics explicitly states that such issues may not be ignored or suppressed. Yet the authors, Strike and Saltis, claim that consequentialist considerations point towards suppressing the issue, as the harm to the student would be quite significant. He will lose his scholarship and perhaps will not be able to attain his degree. So deontology and consequentialists are put one against another, and the case is presented as unresolvable dilemma, which I think it's not. So here is the actual consequentialist view of punishment and discipline. Administration or non-administration of punishment affects more than just the perpetrator. Feinberg expresses 4 declarative functions of punishment: assertive disavowal, symbolical non-acquiescence, vindication of the law, and absolution of others. Let me explain in simple terms. Failure to punish plagiarism sends the message that the school does not oppose plagiarism in general, that it is willing to accept it on certain occasions, that plagiarism may pay off, and all the grades given at the school are now suspect. That is, if I know that some students at your fine establishment get away with plagiarism, how do I know if you have not done the same? Basically, all the school graduates are now suspect. How do I know that they didn't plagiarize their papers? Thus, failure to punish plagiarism is a form of collective punishment, and obviously wrong. That was about the utility. Now let's talk about the distribution of utility. And I will lean heavily on Michael Walzer's notion of sphere of justice. But let me begin with John Rawls's definition of distributive justice. What does it mean that something is distributed justly? And we're talking about grades here. How do we distribute grades? So here's the definition. First, each person is to have an equal right to the most extensive total system of equal basic liberties compatible with a similar system of liberty for all. And second, social and economic inequalities are to be arranged so that they are both A, to the greatest benefit of the least advantaged, and B, attached to offices and positions open to all under conditions of fair equality of opportunity. I would like you to note that John Rawls speaks of equality of opportunity, not equality of outcomes. But I will address both equality of opportunity and equality of outcomes in education in just a minute. But first, let me explain a very self-evident idea that distributive justice should be separated from retributive justice. In other words, when we look at how the grades are, let's say, distributed among different students is one thing. It's one sphere of justice. And the way that punishment is distributed is another thing. Basically, the whole idea of distributing punishment is abhorrent. You cannot distribute failing grades. They have to be earned. So I will lean on the notion of complex equality as it is presented by Michael Walzer. Complex equality is based on separations of the spheres of justice. No citizen standing in one sphere or with regard to one social good may be undercut by his standing in some other sphere. In other words, grading is one sphere of justice. Being privileged, underprivileged, for whatever reason, belongs to a different sphere altogether. They should not be tied up. Your grade should represent your achievement only, and nothing, and no social quality or social status of yours of any type. So what does it mean regarding equality of opportunity, equality of outcomes, and equity? And I'm quoting from a UNESCO report on equity in education. Basically, equity in education means that unequal distribution is fair or justified. You will never have absolutely equal distribution of educational outcomes. Different groups will be represented unequally, but if we can justify this uneven distribution, then we can say that equity is in education is upheld. Another similar definition by OECD, equality of opportunity does not necessarily lead to equality of outcomes. Yet outcomes are distributed equitably only if they're independent from characteristics which are beyond students' control, such as social and economic background. What does it mean? And here UNESCO quotes Michael Walzer again. Teaching children to read is an egalitarian business, even if teaching literary criticism, say, is not. In other words, the goal of the reading teacher is to provide equal chances. It's not to provide equal chances, but to achieve equal results. We want all the children to be able to read, not get the chance to be able to read, but to actually be able to read. Higher education, on the other hand, is akin to holding office, a social position for which everyone has an equal right to be considered, but which will ultimately be granted only to those who qualify. In other words, with kids learning to read, to write, to acquire basic skills, we are interested in equality of outcomes. When we are speaking of higher education, we are interested in equality of opportunity, because equality of outcomes basically negates the whole notion of higher education. That's the UNESCO report. That's not my speculation. This is UNESCO understanding of equity. So I will now reach my conclusions, which are very simple. Consequentialism advocates for giving failing grades to all those who plagiarize, because such a rule leads to better outcomes overall. And second, giving a failing grade for plagiarism is just, fair, and equitable, because rule breaking is not an immutable characteristic. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
so the
now I
people
can.
asking questions should, let's see, should go up here, unless this might work. Does anybody have a question? Let's just see if it works on the answer. Hi, Sergei, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Just a question about something right at the end there, where we were talking about.
Could you please speak up loudly?
Let me just
It will help me a great deal.
Okay, is this better? I've moved to.
Yes, a lot better. Thank you.
Okay. So on the last part there, where you're talking about the difference between, say, children being taught to read and people achieving higher education.
Yeah.
Semantically, it seems to me like an obvious distinguishing thing between the two. But where does that line get drawn between what is considered a basic skill, like reading and writing, and a more optional thing like higher education? Is it just because we call it higher education as opposed to regular education?
Well, historically, we can speak of primary, secondary, and tertiary education. Well, it is obvious that primary education should be not just open for all, but should be a given for all. And it is obvious that tertiary education should not. What about secondary education? I think it very much depends on the context. And in the 21st century, in developed countries at least, I think that secondary education should be a must for all. Although, of course, there are exceptional cases, but exceptional cases are just exceptional cases. The goal should be to give secondary education for all.
Okay. Anyone? We have another question coming up. No, they'll come up the front so you could hear.
Hi, thanks for the interesting presentation. Just on the
Thank
back
you.
of that, actually, while we're talking about primary, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah. If you speak directly to the microphone, I can hear you fine.
So just on the topic of primary, secondary, and tertiary, and what should be the basic sort of standard. I mean, in the modern world, it seems like tertiary education is almost a necessity, whether it's going to do like a trade qualification or some sort of a diploma. It seems that there's almost any job needs at least some sort of further qualification after high school. So I'm wondering how you make that.
Well,
how do I unpick this?
Yeah, I think if I would like to become a bus driver, and I'm just a horrible driver, I shouldn't be given a bus driving license just because we are aiming at equality of outcomes. A person with a bus driving permit who doesn't know how to drive will endanger other people, and such consideration must come first. If you want to apply for a trade, if you want to become a driver, an electrician, a nurse, you will have to prove to the rest of the society that you are capable, not just hey, I deserve to become a nurse, I deserve to become an electrician, a plumber, or whatsoever. You only deserve to
So is that like a question of like social values then, or societal values? Because I mean, we're making the distinction then between deserved and earned. I'm not very familiar with the terminology, but it sounds like, secondary education is a deserved thing, but becoming a bus driver requires further education, becoming even, even a primary school teacher, all sorts of, pretty much anything requires a further qualification. Even a bus driver requires considerable training. So then is that a reflection then of society, societal values?
It is. Well, of course it is. Well, think about an agrarian society. In an agrarian society, you don't require permits to do whatever that they do in agricultural societies.
Right.
Grow crops. You don't need permits to grow crops or to raise cattle. But in an industrialized society, you actually do require permits to engage in any type of activity that society needs. And you have to be able to prove that you're qualified to engage in this activity. That's how it works.
Okay. So the higher education is interesting because obviously we're at a public university in Australia, and I think of like some of my American colleagues who are studying with me, who are here as international students, and they're paying high fees, and they pay very high fees back home as well. So in some sense, it's that third point there around, holding office for which everyone has an equal opportunity to be considered, but only granted to those who qualify. It seems to sort of fall apart a bit on that front. No?
Perhaps so. Perhaps it's a question of resource. It's in Israel, it's a bit simpler. Well, we have a flat rate for all the university, and basically almost anyone can apply.
It's like 2,000 shekels or something per year.
It's something like 13,000 shekels. Yeah,
that's like 4,000 Australian, I think, something like that per year. Close to 5,000 Australians. Okay, so it's a manageable. It's not nothing, but it's not.
It's not nothing, but it's manageable. And the goal is to allow everyone who is willing to participate and to.
That's probably more in the line of what, but it's equal opportunity, but not necessarily equal outcome.
Yeah, well, you basically have to. When you get accepted to Western Galilee College, you have to deal with me, and I will not suffer plagiarism.
Sounds very personal.
No, it's just me. That's me holding a unique opinion against plagiarism, while everybody else is okay with it. I don't think so.
We have our Google with a.
I want to go back to one of your first slides where you were talking about the plagiarism. If you plagiarize, you have certain benefits taken away. Like you might lose your scholarship, you might lose your place in the uni or something like that. Where does magnitude fit the crime considerations come into something like this?
Well, I told you of this case in extreme brief. The way that the case is presented in the ethics of teaching, it is very clear that the student will be punished according to the college's disciplinary code. And the authors also reference, not me, they reference the NEA Code of Ethics, which says that cases of plagiarism should not be ignored or suppressed. And basically, you can't get a passing grade for a plagiarized paper. It's not just me. I did not suggest that this is the appropriate punishment, while everybody else thinks that some other punishment or lack of is more appropriate. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Sergei, I think we'll close in just a minute. And just before I thank you for your time, I just want to, if you can just reflect on how did you get interested in this and what are your research interests and activities in general? At the moment, this is a rather small Australian crowd that has listened to you, but more people may follow this later. So just very briefly on your personal journey into this area.
Oh, yeah, sure. Basically, I'm an ethicist and a philosopher. I studied philosophy. I hold a PhD in philosophy from the University of Haifa. But I started to get interested in education when I thought, well, I want to apply my philosophical knowledge. And naturally, I landed at college, at the educational department in Western Galilee College, where I teach ethics in education and philosophy of education. And I was teaching regular courses on philosophy of education and ethics in education. And the way I taught it was very similar to the way that everybody else teaches ethics in education. But I came to realize that something does not add up. What I know of ethics and what I know of ethics as education just that doesn't add up. Ethicists in education have disconnected from what's going on in theoretical philosophy for the last, say, 50 years. So it's something I'm pointing out. And my previous research has been published in Ethics and Education Journal, which is an excellent journal. And I have already presented this presentation in International Utilitarian Society. And well, basically utilitarians agreed with me, said, oh my God, they totally are misrepresenting utilitarianism and consequentialism in education, if this is indeed the case. So I think I know what I'm talking about.
Oh, of course. Well, very clear. Well, thanks a lot. I mean, for me as a mathematics and data science educator, this has been insightful. Often I deal with ethical issues without any clue really what I'm doing, and you've opened my mind. I think on behalf of the rest of the audience, we can thank you, and thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. You are most welcoming.
Especially taking your time. If you'll stop sharing screen, I'll just share screen just to share an announcement for the rest of the.
Sure, I have already.
So you can find more information about Sergei from his webpage that's available on our page. Feel free to contact Sergei for collaboration or further discussion. And as stated, Sergei was a second speaker in this Australia-Israel Scholar Seminars. We expect many more. So in 48 hours minus 30 minutes, we have Ido Goldstein speaking about a completely different topic. And again, our goal here is to foster collaboration between the countries and the various institutions. And thanks again, Sergei, and have a good holiday today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.